Friends, in way of a little bit of refocus, I'm going to go back to the quotation we started with and read that again. And then, if you like, we can open the meeting up to comments and questions on what we've talked about so far before we move on with some other material after that. Does that sound all right? Okay. I'm going to read through some additional material that's also a part of this same letter. Shoghi goes on. When a person becomes a Baha'i, actually what takes place is that the seed of the Spirit starts to grow in the human soul. This seed must be watered by the outpourings of the Holy Spirit. These gifts of the Spirit are received through prayer, meditation, study of the holy utterances, and service to the cause of God. The fact of the matter is that service in the cause is like the plow which plows the physical soil when seeds are sown. It's necessary that the soil be plowed up so that it can be enriched and thus cause a stronger growth of the seed. In exactly the same way, the evolution of the Spirit takes place through plowing up the soil of the heart, so that it is a constant reflection of the Holy Spirit. In this way, the human spirit grows and develops by leaps and bounds. I think those of you who are suffering the most understand this principle very well. Every difficulty we have turns us towards the prayer book and presents new opportunities of recognizing the help of God. There's one tablet of Abdu'l-Baha. He says that the most important thing is the tranquility of the soul, of the spirit. And he said, this is best preserved by the whirlwinds of tests and difficulties. Just the opposite of the way we would think, If everything's tranquil in our outer life, then our inner life will be tranquil. But it doesn't quite work that way, because then we gravitate from that center into the enjoyment of the things around us, into the enjoyment of the things of the world. Not that they're denied us if we keep on course with our prayers and our meditations and so on. Then all these good things are there. He says the most important thing is love of God. If our love of God is first in our lives, everything else takes its proper connection and relevant importance. Naturally, he says, to go on with the same letter, there will be periods of distress and difficulty, and even severe tests. But if that person turns firmly toward the divine manifestation, studies carefully his spiritual teachings, and receives the blessings of the Holy Spirit, he will find that in reality these tests and difficulties have been gifts of God to enable him to grow and develop. Thus you might look upon your own difficulties in the path of service. They are the means of your spirit growing and developing. You will suddenly find that you have conquered many of the problems which upset you, and then you will wonder why they should have troubled you at all. An individual must center his whole heart and mind on service to the cause, in accordance with the high standards set by Baha'u'llah. When this is done, the hosts of the Supreme Concourse will come to the assistance of the individual, and every difficulty and trial will gradually be overcome. So now, if you have something that you'd like to ask about, otherwise I'll start asking questions. Please.
Well, what do you have to say about the role of those who have departed in this world?
The role of those who have departed in this world is the question. What do I have to say about it? As far as I'm concerned, I know nothing about this. I maybe can think of a few things I've seen in the writings about it. People do have individual experiences, however, where they have an opportunity of seeing a loved one in a dream, or a very potent feeling of closeness. Abdu'l-Baha says we can't see into that world, but that world sees our world. In fact, he cautions us against being overly wrought and sad with the passing of our loved ones. It's natural that we should suffer. I mean, Baha'u'llah himself, when Nawab passed away, there was about 3 months he hardly ate or drank anything. They'd bring him and encourage him, and he was so sad from that. And it is part of the natural, the human part of it that we grieve with the loss of loved ones. But Abdu'l-Baha says that if it's excessive, it concerns the other souls on the other side. They want to get on with their existence and their life, and they're occupied with how am I going to get my daughter to quiet down? Whatever. So there's that. Then there's the other thing is that we should trust that people go on. They leave this world in the state that they are, and they go on, and then they receive the mercy of God, especially if they have embraced the manifestation, have embraced the cause, and have tried to serve it and tried to be faithful to it. Then they are taken into a whole different condition on the other side. A woman wrote, and she said to Abdu'l-Baha that my infant daughter has passed away, and it's so sad to me. And he said to her, you mustn't be too sad about this, that she is in the schools of the kingdom. She's being raised there. I mean, frankly, friends, if you think of all the conceived souls, we understand conception to be the point of departure for existence. That's where existence begins, at human conception. So in the womb, a new soul comes into being. And I think it's fairly clear, we can ask the doctors in the room, but I think they're fairly clear that the majority of souls conceived don't get here. That there's a lot lost. Never mind purposeful abortion, that's another problem. But just the ones that are lost, that even the parents maybe don't even realize there's been a pregnancy and it's been lost. So there's got to be provision, divine providence that's provided for the development of those lucky, I would say, souls that go to the next world, not having passed through the light and dark of this one. They're educated and raised. And Abdu'l-Baha says, you will meet her fully grown, your daughter. You'll meet her fully grown in the next world, and recognize her. Of course, we recognize our loved ones. We don't lose our identity. He said, you're not a drop going back into the ocean when you leave here. Your own reality and individuality. Everything you've experienced here, you carry with you. You will remember this life. You will remember that life. So they do have an influence on us. They can pray for us. He said, pray for them as they pray for you. You know the promises related to those of us who have become Baha'is. The parents of those that embrace the new manifestation, they receive special blessings and forgiveness, the mantle of forgiveness, if they have not opposed the manifestation of God, is the trailer in that one. That doesn't just mean that, you and, as one of my relatives said, you and Bula Hula. I hope they're all right in the next world. But actively opposing, that's another problem. He said it's a relative. Abdu'l-Baha and the Guardian in a letter said it's a relative thing. It's not an absolute life. It's not the same as the reward you get when you've tried to do a life of service and the bounty of God is exceeding. But this is a big assistance, because it becomes clear to the soul in the next world who the manifestations were and what their relationship was and what their son or daughter is doing about it. Interesting aspect of the relationship to souls in the next world. There is we're told to not be attracted to the gifts and bounties of the next world. Bob talks about that, being detached from everything. that he commands us to love God. And our love of God should be such that it's not conditioned on whether we're going to get heaven or hell out of it. It's a surprising statement he makes about that. And even if you knew you were going to go to hell, you still knew that love of God was the right thing, and you do that. And I've seen some passages in some of the writings of Baha'u'llah that suggest people get stuck in the next world. That they get stagnant in their faith. They're attached to the next world. He says you have to be detached from this world and the next world when you get there. And of course there's infinite stages. He suggests world after world, existence after existence through the realms of eternity. It's beyond us to be able to penetrate that, but that's quite exciting. What else? Some of you will be able to say the influence of souls from the other world. Please.
It's about meditation. I have a lot of quotes about meditation, but there's one that I'm looking for that you might be able to help me with. And that is where Baha'u'llah asks us to pray and meditate daily.
I don't know right offhand one like that, but there's lots of them to meditate daily and to pray daily in separate passages, but I think that would certainly... Meditation is a part of prayer in one sense, but Shoghi Effendi said there are two different functions. Don't think just because you're praying that takes care of meditation. He's saying there are four things here: prayer, meditation, study, and action or service. And look how three of them, prayer, meditation, and study of the writings, have to do with preparing our inner state so that our action is effective. Because if we start too soon trying to do things, we run out of energy. We don't feel the confirmation of God, or we get doubts. We have to be returning to the fount of the Word of God to keep our energies alive and to be able to serve in the best way. And that's a challenge.
There's lots of mentions of meditation, but is there a place that tells you how to meditate or ways to meditate?
No, but there's a letter from the Guardian that says there is no formula given to us how to meditate. So the friends are free to choose how they would like to meditate. But when the House of Justice has been asked about this, even and the letter from the Guardians too, he says that always the verbs in the writings that have to do like meditate or ponder or reflect or consider or examine, all of them have as an object a verse of God or some element in the text. That's what you want to be thinking about. What's the meaning of what I'm reading? So that, as the Guardian said, your prayers don't just become rote prayers where you're, I remember, oh my God, that's great of me to know. You say, well, I took care of that one now, along with my affairs. It's not going to do it, You have to be thinking through. He said, even with the obligatory prayers, we have a tendency, of course, they become so routine. We have to think about them fresh, and we have to ask Him to give us new insights as we say them. And as we read other verses of God, that will cause us, that throws light on the ones that we're accustomed to. Like the hidden words, sometimes they become accustomed. Hidden words is a major source of study of the Word of God, and then meditating on their meanings. Because the whole essence of the life of the Spirit, the development of the Spirit, is there. And the whole, if you will, the foundation of it is to die in me that I may live in thee. So what is it that's dying? It's the lower natures, the self and desires that we, through hanging on the favor of God, taking care of that and hold on to that firm handle, gives us the capacity to draw ourselves into the life of the Spirit and away from the influence. And of course, it's a lifetime challenge. Sir?
You have been such a student, you have been such a scholar, the texts that you've written, the talks that you give about this theme of the development of one's inner spiritual life. And I think for many of us, it's a real struggle because the culture that we're from suggests that one should have a balance. It's sort of a dichotomous way of looking at life. That one should, walk the mystical path with practical feet.
Who said that?
I'm getting to the question, and that is that for many of us, it's a real challenge to try to reach a semblance of balance in one's life. And yes, one should, how much time should one give to prayer, meditation, study of the holy utterances, service to the cause of God, when perhaps the practicalities of life mean that you have to have two workers in the household to meet financial needs and so forth. And we're warned not to be, the monks and the hermits and retire from the real world. That's not acceptable in this day. So it's this question of reaching a balance, and is that a mistaken kind of question, mindset to ask the question from? To see that one's life in sort of the material world has to be balanced with one's life in the spiritual world? Is that a mistaken context for asking the question? Because I think that's the way we usually talk about this question in the Baha'i community.
I'm still with the walk the mystical path with practical feet, which we all heard Abdu'l-Baha said years ago, and turns out that David Starr Jordan said it about Abdu'l-Baha, that he walks the mystical path with practical feet. And yes, that's fine. But if we're going to use it as an excuse to not to say the obligatory or something, that's another question. I think that the balance, there is a letter where it says the prolongation of prayer has never been appreciated by God. It's the character, the quality of the prayers. You push forward with the prayer until the connection takes place, till you feel the confirmation. If you've felt it before, you want to at least get back to that point again, if you can, in your prayers. And if that takes extra hours or extra minutes of concentrating on the Word of God, then that's an important thing to do. I think we all know it, Bill Sears used to say, the friends have said, sometimes they say, if you don't feel as close to God as you used to, who moved?
Hey man, I sat around on a Methodist board right now.
Good one. I'm glad they've got it too. They should think of that. That's a big question. David's asked a big question. Does anybody have an answer to this, how they've solved that? Yeah.
Has anybody solved that?
There we go. Yes.
Kind of tailgating along with that question, I'm curious. So far in the writings, I've seen a lot mentioned about crafting and how there's this essence of, with your work, you are developing a craft, and that's a sense of worship. And what I understand so far from the writings is that the material world is a reflection or a shadow of the spiritual world. So that in essence, in our attempt to worship God and to get closer to God, to study these words, that in the practical application of that sense, for example, having a craft or developing a talent or some sort of that we, with the same sort of focus we would apply to reading the Word of God, that we would apply to anything and everything that we do, whether it's work and through an expression of a craft of some sort, that maybe perhaps there's a balance or a bridge between that, I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is a dimension of the revelation of God in this day, which is very, very supportive and satisfying to human nature. It complements the whole thing, so that you find that service or work is worship, is counted as worship. But then the attitude is, because you've read those verses and you've thought about this, that you begin to view your work as a service rather than as a necessary evil that in order to stay alive, in order to have good times on holidays, I have to work. And this is a completely different attitude. And then this would lead the Baha'is to coming back to the idea of service in deciding careers. It starts to make a difference.
Just one clarification, and then I'll get to your question.
In the writings, there's a lot about arts and crafts, and in the original writings, crafts has a much broader meaning than it does in English. English, more we think of arts, crafts connected to arts, or as a kind of a subset of arts. But crafts, Abdu'l-Baha says in one place where he's talking about that, he said crafts such as dentistry, agriculture. In other words, knowledge, we're to acquire knowledge, that's the pure knowledge of it, and then crafts are the application of that knowledge. So technologies of all sort and everything. So it broadens it out a lot, because you say, well, I'm no good at, crafts. It's much broader than that. All of the various contributions that people make to human life. And then he talks about how we have to, our attitude towards God should be to try to carry whatever service we're doing to perfection. He says if a man is a paper maker, he has to make paper as perfect as it can be made. And this echoes something in the Bob's writings too that I've seen that frightens architects, where he says that if you're going to build a building, you have to build it to the highest standard of perfection. That you will be held responsible before a host of angels if you cut corners. That you should do everything you do, you should do the best of your ability. That's the challenge, right? In the society where we live, which making economy works, it means cutting corners. So we have to think about that and pray that we can do our best with that. Please, this gentleman.
Well, I've given a lot of thought to this question about balance as well, and I'm sure probably most of us do. And I think it's really important because I think a lot of young people in particular, but all ages, have this sort of basic, perhaps it's partly a lower nature thing, they have a basic need to recreate and have fun and enjoy. And you talked about this at the beginning of your talk, this emphasis on having fun and finding self-fulfillment, and in the context that you can go too far with that, to make that the end rather than a part of life or a support to your spiritual life. So I've wondered, what is the balance? Where is the place? In America, having fun is really touted as being the sort of the ultimate happiness and the goal of life. And sometimes I've felt, I've been behind my whole life, I felt kind of guilty about wanting to take a hike or, play, I guess. And I don't see a lot in the writing about, there's mention about pursuing a craft. It's okay to do art, but I don't see a lot encouraging recreation, sports or hiking. But I find comfort. I've been reading The Priceless Pearl about Shoghi Effendi, and he withdrew twice when he was appointed guardian. Right away, he did for 9 months, and then again the next year for 5 months. And he went off to Switzerland. And Rugia Khanum describes it very clearly as a withdrawal. And he talks about it as a way to find himself and get prepared. So he was using it as a tool, but he also found pleasure in it. He bought a bicycle, and, So I'm trying to put all this together and, and understand. There must be an element of moderation involved, with recreating. But maybe it's to each person to know themselves and to know what level that they need to work and what part it's played to where it creates the healthiest spirit. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you've kind of given a survey of the whole thing. I think the question is that we should make sure that the spiritual part is in place and then add to it that amount of recreation that we feel we need. Rather than saying, well, I've got my life of fun and recreation, I need to add some devotion to it, as if it were secondary. It's not. It's fundamentally, and I think we're living in a very dangerous time. We have inherited, we're the children of the half-light. We've inherited this terrible materialistic outlook on life. We don't have any idea how detrimental it is. And because of the clash of the religions, we put religion out of education, and the whole acknowledgement of the existence of God, which is so fundamental to human existence, is pushed aside as if it's secondary, as if it's a choice. Yeah, it's all right, but this is really the lowest, darkest period in the entire history, recorded history of humanity is now. Shoghi Effendi tells us. On the other hand, we have very bright developments of knowledge and science and vision that we never had before. So there's a kind of a cross currents going on. But I think we want to try to anchor our spirits as much as we can through at least becoming familiar with those writings that Shoghi Effendi has given us in not only his own writings, but like the Gleanings and Prayers and Meditations and Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. The more that those books look distant and foreign from our day-to-day existence, the more our day-to-day existence is foreign from what we're supposed to be doing. And it takes time and thinking about it. But also we know, I'm a great meditator right to sleep. It doesn't take me very long. As soon as I think of anything serious or higher, I doze off. My wife, maybe she wouldn't confirm that, but she could if she would. So what to do? I don't. It isn't easily solved. I mean, I used to wonder how to find time to pray and meditate serving on the House of Justice. The House has such a crush of subjects and things coming at it all the time. I tell the friends, don't pray for the House of Justice. Pray for its members. House of Justice is fine, that's Baha'u'llah's institution, but the members, they need your prayer and your understanding. What a load to carry. You should be there. I think there's some ambitious souls that think they would like to be members of the House of Justice. In my mind, I always say they should become members. That would be the punishment for wanting to be on the House of Justice. Because after you're on there, all the glory is suddenly gone. You're just in this crush of responsibility and not feeling that you're adequate to it, or how did I get here, or why am I here, or so many things that press on you.
Maybe that's the explanation why only men are on the House.
We don't want to crush women, no. By the way, there's a tablet of Abdu'l-Baha. He says that sex is an accident of this life, that the souls that are coming to exist, they're not male or female. They only become male or female at the time of conception. Then that's defined. So it isn't because of some inherent spiritual fault that women aren't on the House of Justice. There's something else there that we don't understand. He says we don't understand. We will understand in the future. It's clear the future is not here yet. We don't understand yet. Every once in a while, the House of Justice would discuss it together, and they didn't understand either.
I would say that the women have the crush of responsibility, anyway.
Oh yeah, they do,
And
of course.
the family and the home.
I think kind of losing track of how important motherhood is. But that's because, again, of this materialistic society where you have to make your mark, and I need my own life, and all kinds of things we don't quite recognize, the need of. Yeah.
The part about play, I think that, in our feast, right there is one example that we need to have that time to recreate and be social. Because 1/3 of the feast is socializing with each other. And then, I don't know where I read it, but Baha'u'llah loved to go out of the home, or into the garden or the countryside, have time with children and to recreate, to relax.
Yeah.
And Abdu'l-Baha, when he walked everywhere, and I always, you think that when he's walking, it's his time to relax, to be able to not have burdens. And Shoghi Effendi was a special example. And I think that it's a scary line if you talk about how much should we recreate but we should recognize that we are in the half-life, and we are in a very, very material world, and how it affects us.
Yeah.
But we should realize that that's recreating in God's creation. It's part of it's part of the way that we can socialize, the way that we can contemplate and be free of the burdens, so that we can connect our heart and our head. So I think in a lot of the religions, especially the ones that we grew up in, there are lots of things that you shouldn't be doing and lots of things you should be, especially depending on your sex. And if you're a woman, recreating wasn't one of them. So I think if we look at it, it could be, if we start not looking at it as an example, we could start limiting each other, and that's something we don't ever want to do. Say how much or how little.
Yeah.
I work with children, and they play to learn. So I know that it's an important part of our learning and our growing.
Yeah, playing we should be learning when we're playing, if it's possible. I always think that's fascinating, like bird watchers or people that are fascinated by watching the signs of God in nature and so on, and they recreate while they do that. It's a kind of a combination. It's a challenge. The question, I think that the heart of all of this is one of the statements of Baha'u'llah to one of the kings. He says that they must be careful that their affections are focused on God. And then he says the human heart, as created by God, is singular. And therefore its affections are singular. And if you put anything above the love of God, which is a subtle thing in itself, figuring out what the love of God is and the attitude we have towards our Maker, that's just a terrific thing. He said you're dividing. And is there anything that can be, the love of God can be shared, that you can have some love of something else together with the love of God in your heart? It'll mess everything up. So you have to get this, essentially. Abdu'l-Baha says in another place, he says, if in a marriage one of the partners loves the other one more than they love God, it will be the cause of disturbance of them both. So the correct relationship, also he tells us, look, he says we should love each other, we should long for each other like the man in the desert longs for water. But at the same time he says, beware lest, extremes of love or hate deflect you from reality, from truth. So there's a balance there, really. It's a very challenging balance there. And we're constantly, I think, upgrading it in ourselves, how do we put this? And in that sense, we're putting God first. That puts the revelation first. That puts the cause of God first. It's a challenge in a marriage is, where do we put the cause in our marriage, I don't know, we were pioneering, and we don't know whether we did it. I think to some degree we did it. We said we've got to put the cause above our marriage. We have to serve the interests of the cause, and then the rest will take care of itself. So far. Oh.
How did it turn out?
I can't say anything in the presence of my wife. Please. There's one behind you and then you.
I was wondering if you could speak to teaching, particularly distinguishing between proselytizing and teaching, and the importance of teaching the faith.
Yes. Is your question along that line, or is it a different one?
It's a different one.
Different one, okay. The question of teaching is a big one, Abdu'l-Baha says that there was a woman who was there who was asking him about, how can I teach the cause? How can I be a better teacher of the cause? And Abdu'l-Baha said that you must live the life. You remember that quote? Live the life. Live the life. Live the life. 3 times he says it. In order to live the life, he said, you have to acquire thirst for spirituality. The thirst for spirituality will enable you to live the life. How do you acquire thirst for spirituality? He says, read the holy books, particularly the writings of Baha'u'llah on life after death. and the other holy books on immortality. It gets the priorities right, you know? Because living the life means dying in Him that He can live in us. And that's really self-sacrifice. We're called to self-sacrifice. Now, nobody can tell you how much of that you can do. But he says, if you acquire that thirst for spirituality, then you lean on Him, you beg Him to help me live the life. Then those characteristics that are keeping you, that are veiling you from being an effective teacher, get removed. At least this is the promise. So then we end up becoming a reflection of the light of the cause and in our character and such. And Abdu'l-Baha says if you're going to meet somebody 2 times, this is the way I'm recalling, it's from a long time ago when I was a new Baha'i, he said, if you're going to meet a person more than once, live the life. If you're going to meet them only once, mention the cause, if you can. Because you don't know if you'll ever see them. I'm sitting next to them on the streetcar or on the bus, and maybe I'll never see them again. And Shoghi Effendi says it's interesting to use it to introduce the faith in such a way that it produces a question. Almost as if assuming. I know I do that on the airplanes now. So I'm saying, well, you know what Baha'u'llah says about that. So, and then you act astonished. You haven't heard of the Baha'i faith? That's surprising these days. I don't meet people very often that don't. And you point them at the website or something. Baha'i.org, you know. These people can go there. So fanaticism is... Proselytism is really wanting people to enroll in the faith so that you can mark a number on a sheet or something. You know? What possible gain would that be? In fact, in a sense, if we bring people into the faith that don't know what the faith is, we dilute the community instead of enhancing it. It's a challenge. And if we teach the faith in some manner and don't follow through in the right way, then also how said we could inoculate peoples against the cause by...
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah. It's a challenge. But proselytism, I'll tell you what, I saw a letter from the Guardian, it was very reassuring to me. He said that you must strive to live the Baha'i character, live the Baha'i life. If you attain to that, if you are sincere and you're approaching that standard, then he said Baha'u'llah will send waiting souls to you. Far from having to go knock on doors, they will come to you. So there's something in the balance. Doesn't mean that maybe circumstances where going to door is helpful. The House has also allowed that and encouraged it in certain circumstances. But there's other circumstances doesn't make any sense. And it alienates a population. They say, oh, you're just like the Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or something. So one has to look at all those facets. But one thing you can be sure of is the more you move towards living the life, to trying to raise your character to a standard that Baha'u'llah has set and that the writings set, the more effective teacher you will become. And Baha'u'llah, indeed, he says, if you want to teach the cause, he said, first teach your own self, and then go teach others, if you want your words to take effect. On the other hand, we're told that if circumstances arrive, we've seen new Baha'is that they invoke the name of Baha'u'llah and they say something to the people and their hearts are attracted. I remember there was a fellow in Bluefields where we were pioneering in Central America, and he was always talking about the faith to people. He said, there's this new religion, it's a terrific religion. They said, what's the name of it? I can't remember the name. So who's the teacher? I can't remember the name of the teacher. But I can take you to somebody who can tell you. And that enthusiasm, they would come to find out what the heck's this about. And he would bring people to us to talk to about the faith. So that there's not a stage in our Baha'i existence, if we're attracted, that can't be effective in guiding people to the cause. But on the other hand, we should do everything we can to increase our understanding and knowledge of it. Does that help with that question, I think?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, you had a question.
It's in regard to one of the hidden words, the
Have you forgotten the true radiant mourn when these hallowed and blessed surroundings? Should I read the whole thing?
Do you all know which one she's talking about? I think you should read it. Read it. It's not too long.
Have you forgotten the true and radiant morn when in those hallowed and blessed surroundings you were all gathered in my presence beneath the shade of the tree of life, which is planted in the all-glorious paradise? Awestruck, you listened as I gave utterance to these three most holy words. O friends, prefer not your will to mine. Never desire that which I have not desired for you, and approach me not with lifeless hearts, defiled with worldly desires and cravings. Would ye but sanctify your souls, ye would at this present hour recall that place and those surroundings, and the truth of my utterance should be made evident unto all of you. Is there any reference about this that's directed towards those that broke the covenant?
I'm not aware of any connection with those that have broken the covenant, except in a sense of that, if we don't remember, we've all broken the covenant. But it's not the covenant of succession, it's the covenant of God is our maker. He tells us what to do. Do we accept that or do we not accept it, This is like he talks about. If you neglect reciting the verses of God morning and evening, then you've not been faithful to the covenant, the Akdas says in the Akdas. So it's different from covenant breaking in the very formal sense of violating the administration of the cause or something. But I think that this is, our souls have been instilled with that in pre-existence, if you will. Before they become individualized, these things have been set down. Now think of those three things that he says, that they're the very steps of living the Baha'i life. Prefer not your will to mine. And what's the second one there? I forgot the...
Never desire that which I have not desired for thee.
Never desire that which we have not desired for thee. He's telling us something so fundamentally essential to our proper existence, to the sign of our faith in him, to our devotion. And the last one is about the passions and stuff again. Approach us not with lifeless hearts, defiled with worldly desires. Yes.
I just have another question. I was wondering, as parents, I'm thinking more and more that would you think that if your child is a Baha'i and the person that they're marrying is not a non-Baha'i, is it as a parent's almost obligatory thing to really question that, because what is their life going to be like as a couple in the Baha'i faith? Should we just say, consider maybe this isn't the best thing for them? Because we have the ultimate responsibility of saying yes or no.
Yes, I think it's important that we realize that this is an issue that's quite flexible. You can take it from the point of view, I'm only going to let them marry Baha'is, or you could say that here's a marvelous opportunity. We have to try to assess the candidate to see whether they potentially can embrace the faith. Do they have good character? Abdu'l-Baha says, that in a man choosing the wife can work the other way around, but he has said it this way. He says they should examine the character of the girl. And in order just to understand the character of the girl, they should check out the mother's character, which would be the mother-in-law's character in this case. And that's very important, because the mother has such an impression, creates such an influence on the child. So I should think that reflects back onto the parents and parental consent to try to understand something of the innate character of the potential spouse. Do they have do you feel that you pray about it, you feel they have the potential to? Because after all, we're told to marry to bring forth one that will remember God. And We try our best, but it doesn't always work that way. But oftentimes, non-Baha'is become wonderful Baha'i spouses in time, so it's not an absolute thing. Other times they pull the Baha'i away from activities and close them in, and so it's not healthy. But I think, we can only trust. In prayer, as parents, we take those decisions, take them seriously, but then once you've taken it, leave it in the hands of God. We can't see around corners so completely as to be able to know when we're doing this in a perfectly good way. But it certainly is a challenge, I think, for all parents. Yes.
I have another question. Do you have a comment on this? Okay. So my question was, in your stand-up talk, you mentioned that hell is a very real thing, if I remember what you said. But
yes.
You can elaborate on that.
You want me to elaborate? Well, the Master, he states in one place, he says, heaven and hell exist in all the worlds of God. All the different stages of where there are souls that love themselves more than they love God. And that creates a terrible distortion. And it is equivalent to distance from God. Not that God is distant from them. He still has them in his domain. And he still sustains them, because all life comes from him. But they believe they're the source of their own importance. And this is when the soul is in that state, then Abdu'l-Baha says, they deprive themselves of the bounties of God. The bounties of God are like sunlight. If you turn your back on the sunlight, you don't see it, you don't recognize it, it's a grave difficulty. And in the next world, he says, okay, the wrath of God encompasses them. Now, we don't like that. We like God is always loving and kind. And certainly, he says, if his mercy and grace didn't exceed his anger and his wrath when you don't obey him, we'd all be gone. So the fact that we're still here chattering away is a sign of his great mercy. But we have the implications. Certainly in Promised Day Has Come, friends, you find Shoghi Effendi's assessment of that the punishment of God, the calamity of God, is a punishment, but it's a corrective punishment. It's like the punishment of a loving father that disciplines his child so that they can get on the right path, so that they can mature properly. So the things that humanity is going through and will go through, and we don't even know how far it's going to go, Baha'u'llah says it's not appropriate to speak about the degree to which mankind will be degraded. This is coming. Think of it, a lot of you have lived long enough to see a great change in the outlook of society, even in 30, 40 years, 50 years. Far more than we would have imagined, society has deteriorated. Where is it going to go from here? I don't know. How far? It's the breakdown of society. Think of the implications of the word disintegration of the old world order. The order comes from the Word of God. It comes from the law of God. No matter how much it's been watered down century by century, there are certain things like honesty and truthfulness and things that people know are inherently. Violating them leads to a breakdown in society. You violate the laws of God. You violate the Ten Commandments. All of those are now up for grabs. And think of what's going on in society. Marriage is broken down. Parental authority is gone. Have you read the Old Testament? It says that, if a child is disobedient or insolent to his father, the punishment is capital punishment. That's the Word of God. How far we are from that now. But also we move forward and there's more independence of spirit, and every soul has to search for truth for themselves. This is terrific evolution. But some of those laws were very harsh in the past, and they kept order. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was just struggling recently with trying to decide, I don't know how much you have to say about this, about how to make contributions to discourse in society, all these things that are going on about racism and this discrepancy between the wealth and poverty, and how we can contribute. And of course we can through our core activities and individual conversations, but then this whole idea, I usually use my Facebook, and I'm not really too much into that, but for posting just cute pictures of my kids or little things. I was wondering if you had any thoughts, because it seems so, the conversation is so polarized or political. A lot of them become political, and it's so ugly, whereas the Baha'is have so much to contribute. But how to do that, I think it's easier when you're just talking to somebody, but in places like social media, like on Facebook, do you have any thoughts about, I'm struggling with how far to go or what to say in those kind of times, or to say anything there and just limit it to the conversations I have. I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
I think the guidance of Shoghi Effendi is essential for all these things, trying to get to an understanding of what he says, how Baha'is should be careful, particularly political matters, of making statements about politics or about political leaders or about some of the issues which are now political rather than just social in character, we need to be careful of that. We can make the broader statements that we know the principles, but I'm hearing that some of the Baha'is are saying pretty aggressive things about racism or politics or the president or whatever it is. It's not appropriate. They're just unschooled yet. We give too much importance. Politics is not going to solve anything. It's temporary stages that we're working through, but we know that these life-giving principles that Baha'u'llah brings are the source of the renewal of mankind and setting us on a new path. And he says the old order is going to be rolled up. So I want to be standing right in the middle of that carpet when it rolls up. Try to transcend a little bit. Yes?
I came to the Baha'i faith rather late in life. I didn't have the bounty of being a youth or a child or anything like that. And the thing that attracted me most to the faith, many things attracted me, but the thing I think I'd put up most is the thought that we would have a collective approach eventually. Not that it would be immediate and all in a nice package. That's not progressive. You have to progress through things to get there. But that was one of the great attractants for me to the faith. And in the time I've been in the faith for the last 20 years, the two things that have really impressed me have been the rise of children and youth, the training of them, the participation of them in that time. And also, although it's far away from me geographically and I've never visited, I imagine you have, but the beginnings of national and local houses of justice, the first inklings of those, the announcement by the House of those first few that will be developed and constructed.
Houses of worship.
The houses of worship. I tend to refer to them as houses of justice because in my mind they'll evolve into that, but that's getting ahead of things, I suppose. But given those changes that you have doubtlessly witnessed far more close up than I have, what advice would you give? Just a single thing. There's so many things you could say, but the one that might come first on your list. The first thing you would advise these emerging communities, instead of Baha'is being individuals as were in the heroic age, but we're now becoming more collective, more anonymous in the sense that it isn't about individual names or particularly famous people that are going to lead us forward, but somehow we're going to be doing this collectively. What advice would you give to these emerging communities that are just beginning to emerge like little sprouts out of a seed?
Mm-hmm. There was a quotation here that I was thinking of sharing with you. Let's see. The growth of the community is every indication depends on unity. And the unity depends on drawing close to God. As we move towards Baha'u'llah in our hearts, we also move towards each other. This is the thing. I think I didn't finish the thing about Horace Holly when I first mentioned it, that he says it's not just deciding to get along with each other. He said it's rather the transcendence of a number of individuals into a Baha'i life where this love, terrific love, is awakened in the community, and the community becomes a haven for people. And that unity of the Baha'is and love for each other, not the sticky kind, but the one that's a reflection of appreciation for our Creator, is the magnet which draws everybody to us, draws others, draws waiting souls. I think some of the waiting souls, they don't get introduced to us because we're not in a state to really confirm them. That I want to say that, but basically, for instance, here's one kind of, and Chuck gave this kind of advice over and over in different ways. He says, we must never dwell too much on the attitudes and feelings of our fellow believers towards us. What is most important is to foster love and harmony and ignore any rebuffs we may receive. In this way, the weaknesses of human nature and the peculiarity or attitude of any particular person is not magnified, but pales into insignificance in comparison with our joint service to the faith we all love. Just trying to find this other one I was wanting to use. Quote from you.
Where's that quote from?
This is in the compilation Living the Life, and it's 19 September 1948, a letter. Just peripherally to that, he said, it is the quality of devotion and self-sacrifice that brings rewards in the service of this faith, rather than means, ability, or financial backing. Devotion and self-sacrifice, that's the source of success, if you will, for ourselves individually and as a community. So as we have more collective expression of this, we're herded together, if you will, and we have to learn to live with each other's shortcomings. Dunbar says he gives the example of sunlight as the kind of love we have to have for each other. He says that in sunlight, the sun doesn't look to see whether it's shining on the home of a rich or poor person, or whether it's shining on the home of somebody saintly or vile and low in nature. It shines. That's what it's supposed to be doing. And the love we have for each other is that love of God that doesn't seek out who's worthy and who isn't worthy. That's the love that we have to gradually nurture in our heart for mankind. But it has a tendency to raise the community. But if we fix ourselves on each other's shortcomings, it's endless. And as soon as you take your sight, as the Guardian says here, we're each making the furrows. We're plowing our own field, our own life in existence, so that the seeds will go deep into it. But if we begin worrying about the other guy's path is not straight, our own is going to go off. So it becomes a waste, really, when we are so concerned about other Baha'is in the community. On the other hand, that's like everything, there's extremes. The assemblies need to watch the behavior of people. If they're behaving so badly in public that it's destroying the good name of the faith, which doesn't happen very often now because the public is so off. We hardly notice the Baha'is going off. But then the assembly can institute a series of reminders. And maybe they don't call the person in front of the whole assembly, but they appoint a member of the assembly to go and talk with them and say the assembly hopes he'll bear in mind that what our actions influence other people around us and so on, in a very loving manner. We don't want to punish the people, we want to heal them. So that's quite a different approach. If the assembly is thinking how to uplift, how to be a loving father to the community and not be the governor and ruler of the community, it produces a different effect. Please, sir.
I want to go back to your words on politics. You said politics. And I find that in talks with some Baha'is that people are completely paralyzed with social and governmental issues, but also realizing there's different types of politics, partisan politics and body politics, which is for education, the quality of our water, transportation, that type of thing. And of course, detachment and mediation should always be our goal. So I wanted to make, myself, sometimes I hear a lot of Baha'is say nothing about, I can't understand anything about politics, but body politics is what our life is governed by in some ways in the man world or human world. So I would like to ask a little bit of clarification from you.
No, I think what you said is very sensible. It's just the point to not put too much hope in the political steps that are available to us. Be as supportive as we can, where it doesn't become partisan in character and divisive, partisan in character. Then we should pull back from it. But voting and thinking about the issues, and that's all open to us. But not a whole lot of hope, I think, in saying, well, the next president will solve all the problems or something like that. Doesn't seem to work that way. Yes.
One of my real fears, concerns, is what our children and youth are exposed to in society today. And it seems so difficult to protect them from that. Is there can you offer us any guidance or help? I see so many of our kids falling into addictions. It's heartbreaking to me. And I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I think we're all faced. That challenge is everywhere amongst the Baha'is. It's really difficult.
Can I offer a little something?
Yes, please.
Support your animators and teachers as best you can. They're often feeling a bit isolated.
Support your animators and teachers. They're a bit isolated sometimes. Yep. I'll tell you, friends, I've been moving around the world, you see all kinds of problems and shortcomings and so on, but seeing youth animators meeting, because I'm moving around, they oftentimes will say, well, would you meet with the animators? So the animators all come together and meet them. They're at the forefront of spiritual vision and understanding. It's an amazing group. I think to myself, these kids haven't had much exposure to anything, but they get it right, and somehow becoming animators, especially the full-time ones, they're suddenly faced with, what is this? What do I do with it? How do I do it? And that somehow drives them to prayer, and the prayer brings them right to the forefront of the activities of the cause. And so, associate with them, support them. They're the kids that are getting it right, I meet with them and they say, what are we going to do with the junior youth? I say, what's the problem? They say, well, they say to us, why can't we have sex together? The junior youth are not Baha'is. So right away they're asking, why do you think, why can't we all have sex together? It feels good and it's nice, and what's the problem? Or why can't we smoke pot? Why can't we smoke pot in the junior youth meetings? They're facing terrific challenges, but the outcome of that is that the animators are becoming something very important. And the junior youth come and go. We've a lot of places that I see that the turnover of junior youth, maybe one or two of them out of a whole crowd will stick with it a while and get attracted to the faith. What Shoghi Effendi said, this is, again, I don't think it's written any place, but he said there's about 2% waiting souls in the world, every place. And when Shoghi Effendi says, if you live the life you'll magnetize, Baha'u'llah will send you the waiting souls. Those are the ones we're trying to reach. We should be praying to reach waiting souls. So what do we do about teaching? That's one of the things we want to do, is we want to be begging Baha'u'llah every morning, help me find waiting souls that are longing to hear the cause. Because they're the ones that are going to rise and support, and they don't have any problem except they tell you, why did you wait so long to tell me? Or, why are you keeping this a secret? You feel bad because your whole life you've been trying to do something. Well, somebody had a hand here, please.
I understand that we at this point feel a lot of pressure and see a lot of negative in modern society. But the world has been going to hell in a handbasket for thousands of years. I mean, that's not something new. And in the 1920s, Baha'i parents probably felt exactly the same way in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, when we were young, think what we were exposed to. And it's exactly the same situation today, but now we have the tool to deal with it, and that is the junior youth and children's classes that we have a lot of pressing forward with.
Yes.
I was wondering if you have knowledge about or experience seeing non-Baha'is or kids like high school kids that are willing to take on the animators of junior youth.
You're talking about Baha'i youth or other youth?
About youth that are not Baha'is but still willing to participate in the conferences and the animated youth being available to help with the sort of projects and things.
It's wonderful what's happening, and it's mostly because we've opened the community in a way that we have friends of the Baha'is that can take part, and people that can be with us a while and don't have to make a decision about it. But most of them have made a decision. If they've gotten to this stage of that, maybe they're not enrolled in the faith for one reason or another, but they're animated by the spirit of the cause. Otherwise, that attraction would, how would they want to take part?
I'd love to hear specific stories, and you've been around the world. Can you give us a really beautiful example of some of that, the youth animators?
Well, I was in a meeting in Singapore last July. I went there for their summer school, their annual summer school, and met the animators one evening. There were a terrific variety of different backgrounds from Malaysia, or from Indonesia, from Singapore, from Chinese were there, and they were full of life. It just surprised me. On the other side of the world, I wasn't sure what I'd seen. I've been to China in the past, but I hadn't been to Southeast Asia. And to see that they had the same quality as the animators that I met in Birmingham in England, for example, where there was a terrific group of kind of a pioneer movement where a very devoted young Persian woman moved into a community and opened her flat for meetings. It's a place of a lot of ethnic diversity, and that was reflected in the meetings. And it was so easy to talk about the faith. It was just everybody was so accepting and attracted to the young people that were inviting them to the meetings and so on. Look at our meeting today, friends, and you've come, but there's not a whole lot of youth. I mean, you're youthful in spirit, but not a whole lot of youth here today. I think this is, we're finding a role for devoted Baha'is in the community, because so much emphasis on youth activities, and we always haven't always seen a role. How do we participate in that? We're asked to support financially or by service like providing food for groups of youth, or different ways I know that we're being called upon to do. At a recent reflection meeting in the Sacramento area, they reported that the institutions had met and that they were feeling there's potential, such a great potential in the mass of the believers beyond the youth, the older youth. So what? And they said that the House of Justice has provided devotional meetings as really the one of the core activities that everybody can participate in. Either hold your own or support somebody else in the community. And in a number of places, the Baha'is are advertising interfaith devotional meetings, or just having devotional meetings of the Baha'is that the Baha'is are attracted to, and they make them attractive meetings, and they bring friends to them. Would you like to come and just listen to prayers? There's no hard sell there. There's nothing. Or other places where the devotional meetings have a social part towards the end, and after that, people start talking about the faith with each other and asking the reality of the faith, and they become quasi-firesides. There's nothing wrong with firesides either, friends. We've heard that for years, but the House has clarified they've never forbade firesides nor deepening classes. They pointed in a certain direction, focus on the new activities so that they would get a foothold. And now they're talking about, counselors and everybody's talking about bringing those activities back. So if you feel inspired to have a fireside, or if you used to have a pattern of fireside, start it again. Yes. And if the board member or somebody comes and leans on you and says, what are you doing? You say, show me the text.
Okay.
It's okay. Or call David Young. Please.
When I became a Baha'i, there were lots of traveling teachers all the time over the years, and that doesn't seem to be happening as much. But there's very few that travel and teach the way it happened, decades ago. So it seems like in this room there's so much wealth of knowledge and experience and devotion that everybody could maybe find time to say, well, I would like to go down to Red Bluff or Willows or wherever, or up in anywhere, and give a presentation on my favorite topic, and then the locals can publicize it, and then you invite your friends, and then you get things going and start a Ruby book or something like that. Because it seems like in some places it's so stagnant, like where I live, it's pretty stagnant, except in more distant communities.
So we should have the study circles, but there's no candidates to put in the study circles. So we need to create activities that will move the souls towards that.
And those of us that are overworked, we need to carve out a niche in our life where we can devote to that.
I'm willing to say something that's probably out of order and unadministrative. But if you all think in this room today, now you've heard where you're from and you know proximate, and you've heard different people speaking, and you'll talk to them again because we'll have another break, more chance for you to get to know each other. This is a kind of a justification of why a meeting like this has any meaning, because you're also getting to see each other. Invite somebody to come for that kind of a meeting, from your community. Say, well, I'd like to do this, and go back and arrange it, and there'll be travel of a sort taking place out of that. Dr. Young, is that all right?
You better say yes.
Who is he to judge? That's a very wise answer. Yes.
You sort of touched on a perennial question I have, which is if we have all these youth conferences that motivated the youth, and we have so many older people, especially retired, such as myself, why can't we have an old geezers conference?
Yeah.
And put all these resources on the table.
With apologies to everyone, that's what we're having today.
But we need a wider base one. But I wasn't going to point that part.
No, it's true. Well, I think with the centenaries coming up, maybe we'll have some other activities that'll bring us all together. I hope so.
If I can respond to the point that was made before about teaching non-Baha'i children and youth. I live in a neighborhood of probably about 200 apartments. And for about the last 40 years, we've been teaching exclusively non-Baha'i children. And I think the most heartwarming thing that I've had happen is I got caught one day by somebody when I was getting in my car. They came up to me and said, Denise, and I didn't recognize who they were, but it was a parent who had been letting her children come to our children's class, and I knew her to know that she had many, many problems in life in terms of addiction and no father and so on. And she came up out of the blue and just said, I want to thank you for letting my children come to your classes. Now, I don't know what effect it had on ever recognizing or knowing for sure who Baha'u'llah was, but at least something was touched there.
You're building community.
Yeah. And that to me is the most satisfying thing that happens.
Absolutely.
And we did have two non-Baha'is, 16 and 17-year-olds, never took Book 5, never did any Baha'i class, but they were willing to animate junior youth for about a year with us. So it works.
Yes?
In Hood River, we have a youth group, and there's 14 participants on a regular basis. Not one of them is Baha'i. Right at this moment, I'm helping a tutor Book 5 with some of them, two of them have already been animating.
partake in the group and stuff. We had a youth conference a while back, and at the end when they were talking about where do we go from here, a number of the youth from other places were saying, well, I'm the only Baha'i youth in this area. I've lived out, we hear this a lot, I don't know how to do it because I'm the only Baha'i from isolated Baha'i youth. And so one of our youth who's been animating the junior youth group said, none of us are Baha'is. Just go out and do it.
It's true.
Friends, I wanted to say, mentioning the importance of study of the utterances of the writings. And there's a compilation, The Importance of Deepening Our Knowledge and Understanding of the Faith from the House of Justice. It's been published in the past. It's also in the compilation of compilations. You can find it there. Originally, I think it was in 84, and then it was revised in 92. The House of Justice is culled from all of the writings of the central figures and of the Guardian on the question of study of the writings. As you know, one of the basic principles of faith is universal education, and reading and writing is stressed by Baha'u'llah, so that all of us will have access to the words of God ourselves individually. We need to create that in the world. That means that also the question of literacy is a very important Baha'i service if you can help in any way with that. And in some places, communities are offering services to youth to improve their reading skills or their study skills and things like that. It's very important. We ourselves are raised in a society where there's not much emphasis, not a lot of emphasis on reading. And yet, as Baha'is, we have a terrific challenge. We have a whole range of Baha'i literature. The writings, the sacred writings themselves, and then the supporting writings of the Guardian and now of the House of Justice, that we need to somehow get our heads around. And not only does this then have this salutary effect of gradually replacing, it's like replacing bad cells with new cells. When we read the writings, our old concepts and ideas get replaced because they get cleansed with the advice and guidance of the Word of God. It goes in and takes old things out. We had acquired knowledge, now we get first-hand knowledge. We read this and it inspires us directly. We feel confirmation in our souls that knowledge is solid. And the spiritual proofs of the existence of God and the importance of the gods, Shoghi Abdul Wahab says, they're spiritual in nature. They're evident to the soul. The soul recognizes, has intuitive awareness of what truth is. That's why we're here, in a sense. That's what's attracted us to the cause. Not because we have so many scholars and doctors amongst us telling us what other people say about the faith. So we need to absorb the cause itself. And it doesn't matter what stage of your Baha'i life, there's still so much more to be done, it seems to me. I don't know, I've ended up studying much more after I left Haifa than I ever did before that. And this is Shoghi Effendi in these letters makes certain recommendations. He said, there are some basic Baha'i books that you need to focus on. And as I break down the various passages that are there, I'm coming up with several stages of study. First of all, there's read, where he tells you to read these works, okay? Then he says, in other places, you must read and reread. There was a Westerner at the Guardian's table when he asked if he'd done the Agon, and one man, if he'd read the Agon, and he said, he'd done it. Shoghi Effendi didn't say anything, but in the next pilgrim group, he said, there was a pilgrim here who said they'd done the Agon. He said, it's impossible to do the Agon. You never finish doing the Agon. It'll do you before you do it. So, reading and rereading becomes essential. Then he says in the Advent of Divine Justice, systematically and painstakingly reading the literature of the cause. Painstakingly. It does take a bit of effort and you know, when you study anything in school or in universities now, how much attention has to be, how many hours we put into it. Most of us have studied state history in the United States infinitely longer than we've ever paid attention to the Dawnbreakers, for example. Which one has importance in our lives? This state education and things, it isn't so much the content as it is the sharpening of the reasoning powers and the assimilating powers of the mind. I think this is modern education, as far as I can see, that's the great gift of it. Apart from that, it introduces a whole lot of nonsense, acquired knowledge that we need to get rid of eventually or replace. But it holds us up in the meanwhile till we can find the reality of the issues that are there in the writings. So then we have reading, rereading. Then he says that we must digest the contents of these books. And the books that he mentions over and over again, initially in the 30s, he mentions the Gone, Some Answered Questions, and the Dawnbreakers. Later on, he adds more books because he translated more books. Some Answered Questions, or as I say, it's there, together with the Gone. Says these two books can make anybody a Baha'i, he says in a letter to a woman in South America. The Gone and Some Answered Questions. Dawnbreakers creates the spirit of sacrifice and a new race of men, if you will, that is inherent in that. Then he says that besides the rereading them and digesting them, he goes on to say their content should be mastered. He says with regard to the Igon, that if the friends wish to become competent teachers of the faith, indeed, they should master each and every detail of that holy book. Wow. I got into that. It was kind of endless one, and that's how I wrote this book on the companion to the Igon. Just preliminary, really. They're preliminary things. There a lot more to be done in that regard. And so we have this read and reread and digest and master, and finally the last one he says then they should memorize characteristic passages from these writings. Years ago, when Marilyn and I were youth, we were at Geyserville, and the Hand of the Cause, Mr. Khadim came, and we were sitting under the tree with the youth, and he was so pleased talking with us, and he said that, you know, you should memorize the writings. So we asked him, well, what did he suggest? What should we memorize? And he said, the Kitabi Gone. You saw a whole lot of American faces staring in bewilderment at the Hand of the Cause. And then he saw that, so he said, well, Tablets of the Kings. I wasn't getting anywhere either. Finally, he said, looking pained, you know, like, he said, you know, in the Orient, the Baha'i youth memorize these things. They memorize the Igon, they memorize the Epistle of the Son of the Wolf, they memorize the Tablets of the Kings, the Aktas. He said, Tablet of Carmel. Oh, he got enthusiastic because some of us knew that was about 6 pages long. Maybe it was still going to be the challenge of a lifetime, but maybe we could. And a number of us tried, and I think I had it memorized for about 2 weeks, and then it slipped away again. we just don't have enough emphasis in the West. Doesn't mean that we couldn't, but we don't give ourselves that challenge. You know? Helen Bishop, who was, as you know, originally here from Oregon, was on pilgrimage. After traveling to various universities in Europe and giving lectures about the cause and everything, and the Guardian had asked her to write the introduction to the Kitabi Gone for the Western edition. Terrific woman. She said she was going on pilgrimage. When she went on pilgrimage, she thought of some important questions to ask the Guardians. She tells the story on herself. She says, you know, so impressing with the questions, and also she thought of some very super questions. She said, when I came into the room, the Guardian at the dinner table welcomed me very warmly and sat me at his right-hand side. And then he began speaking to the friends, and he never looked at me again, just ignored me. And she said, I reflecting, what's the matter? And then finally he turns to me and he said, and Mrs. Bishop, he said, you must have some questions. She said, I couldn't remember the questions at that point. It burnt them all out of me, so to speak. So finally she said, I ventured, I said, Shoghi Effendi, when teaching the cause, what can I do to improve? What can a person do to improve the way they teach the cause? And she said, he answered something that I would never have imagined he was going to answer. He said, Mrs. Bishop, you should memorize the hidden words. And she says, I went and I did it. I memorized a number of them. And how often those words would come into the conversations or into the presentations on the faith. And Abdu'l-Baha, the Guardian saying that, is echoing Abdu'l-Baha's several tablets where he says, memorize the hidden words. It's the essence of all religions. It's the essence of your spiritual future, so to speak. But again, this is part of this spectrum of read, reread, digest, master, memorize, and apply those to these basic books. And then, there's so much more to study beyond that, but that's a good place to begin. And to do that, you probably have to make yourself somewhat of a program, so that you're steady in it. That doesn't mean you wouldn't read the verses of God morning and evening. We have that, but he says that's to give wings to the soul. It doesn't give you a broad Baha'i knowledge of the Baha'i teachings. Although the essence of the teachings of the faith they're like holograms. If you get to the essence of one, you've gotten to the essence of them all. Imagine Abdu'l-Baha says in a statement, he says, if you are assisted and confirmed to live according to one hidden word, he says, you will have been assisted to live according to all of them. They're that tied together in their character, So that's something you want to have by your bedside. Again, I think to myself, that's the way I put myself to sleep. I read them, fall asleep. If I try to read them in the morning, wake up and look at them for a little bit. That's not a full program of studying the utterances of God. And if you realize that it isn't so much enough that you can be proud that you've read all the books, it's a question of replacing acquired knowledge with intuitive understanding of the divine text. That's perhaps one of the things that I would want to stress in a meeting like this, that we're all we're getting towards the final lap of the whole thing, and we want to make sure we've gotten what we need to get out of it. Abdu'l-Baha, in one meeting in the West, he stood up and addressed the audience. He says, in 100 years, everyone in this room will be dead. I don't want to say that about this meeting, but I think that's clear enough. We'll all be gone. So where will we be, and what will we take with us? So this question of the enthusiasm for life and the teachings and living the life and being able to communicate the cause has a whole lot to do with thinking about life after death and acquiring a firm knowledge of that, realizing, back to the seize your chance, for it will come to thee no more. So then the question of how much fun should we have becomes an important one, because we only have so much time. What do we do with our time, Oh, I'm retired now and take it easy, I don't know. Take it easy is a formula for disaster.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't have to show off being fanatic. You just need to do that inside yourself and discipline yourself as much as you can. And pray for those of us who are wild enough to say these things in public and not follow them in our private daily existence.
I just want to make a quick comment. I think Mr. Dunbar gave me a softball, and I kind of didn't take it up. He was joking about saying something unadministrative and encouraging when you return to your communities that you perhaps consider inviting somebody to come give a talk or whatever it is that you think you should do. And I want to just support what was said. I think the House of Justice has written most recently and clarified some misunderstandings that it's not a question of, say, core activities and nothing else. I mean, this is dichotomous thinking. It's all are useful and valuable. It's the idea that core activities, of course, as we know, are designed with outward reach in mind, raising up human capacity, us raising up human capacity to share this cause, knowledge, insights, and skills, right? But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have, the House specifically says, we should have deepenings, we should have travel teachers, we should have firesides and so forth and so on. But it is the experience of the worldwide Baha'i community that the core activities are the most effective at actually raising human capacity. So inviting folks to come and give a talk with the mindset, this is a portal to open interest to those activities that will provide the foundation for the community's needs at this time. That there's nothing wrong. There's nothing, I mean, we're joking about it a little bit, but there is misunderstanding because of the way that the 5-year plan was introduced by some of the friends in this country, the earliest versions. So Mr. Dunbar is joking, and I was joking back, but it's a serious subject, and there shouldn't be any misunderstanding at all. This is just my understanding, not speaking on behalf of the National Spiritual Assembly, but you can read for yourself in the recent letters of the House of Justice. And the focus on the youth conferences and youth activities is because it's the learning of the world over that when the junior youth are involved, all the other core activities flourish. And it's not youth activities or junior youth spiritual empowerment program to the exclusion of all else. But that's one very effective means of moving the faith forward. It's not that everybody needs to stop and let the youth do junior youth spiritual empowerment program. That's not what the House has said. There is a segment of the community that needs special attention for now. But the rest of us should be doing all the things that we know to do that Mr. Dunbar's kind of drawing our attention to. So I didn't want to leave that out there with just the joking element, because it's really a serious area of misunderstanding and confusion in the community. Hopefully I didn't confuse the issue more by trying to add some clarity. But it's a serious misunderstanding in the community. So hopefully I did a little better on the second go around with that softball.
Thank you.
I just want to tell you how much I love being here with all you old geezers. And the youngins too. I just your remark and somebody's remark back here about, well, why can't we get the older people together? I had a BFO. That's a brilliant flash of the obvious. I live at a retreat center that's highly underutilized, and I've always thought, wouldn't it be fun if the Baha'is got together during the fast and just housed together and read the writings and relaxed and prepared meals for the evening, and I don't see any reason why that can't happen now. And I live at a retreat center that can house maybe 60 people. We have an industrial kitchen. It's on 86 acres of property. There's lots of trails, and it's a permaculture farm, sustainable organic farm. That was my BFO. If you guys want to come over and join me during the fast, I don't know that so much. That would be awesome.
Where's that?
It's in Dexter. Remember, that's the place that's just outside of Eugene, 18 miles east of Eugene. And so if that sparks anybody's idea here, come see me. Let's not just leave the room and leave it all here. Let's take something intentional out with us. That would be awesome.
One thing I'd like to say that has attracted me over the years, and I've never had a really enough time with it, and maybe some of you already have discovered how important prayers and meditations by Baha'u'llah is. This book Shoghi Effendi gave us, and he said that he hoped that was a book whereby we would draw close to Baha'u'llah so that he could draw close to us.
Yeah.
It's the essence of what he talks about in this book. And in it, there are prayers and meditations. I mean, there are prayers that obviously are prayers that we could say from our human standpoint. There are prayers that he says on our behalf there. But then there's a whole lot of prayers that are his prayers, that are revealing of the dual nature of the manifestation of God, his human sufferings, his observance of the persecution of the friends, and so many martyrs, people killed for the cause in the first stages of the faith, that when he was still on earth. And I think that over the years I've found people comment and say, I find one of these prayers where it says, "Thou seest me shut up in my prison fortress." And we got that far with the prayer, and we skipped to, that's not a prayer for me, that's his prayer. And we skipped to somewhere else. Whereas Shoghi Effendi has taken all this time to translate that, because for the first time, we have so much greater insight into the dual nature of the manifestation of God, and what he taught, how he educates us about the unity of God and the greatness of God through looking at these prayers. In my own book, I kind of marked the ones that look like meditations of Baha'u'llah. And I go and read them actually in sequence and look at them and think about. And then the crossing of one passage which will illumine a passage in another prayer and help us to understand the nature of those steps we need to take for personal transformation. The steps we need to take which will water, if you will, that seed of the Spirit that's been born within us by having embraced the cause. So I hope you'll have terrific adventures of the Spirit. There may be a few more questions, but I think basically I've kind of shared with you what I was hoping to be able to share. One, please.
Well, I just wondered if you would elaborate a little bit on your understanding of the purpose of these writings that go into detail about the process that the central figures went through in struggling and suffering and being persecuted. These meditations you talked about, that were Baha'u'llah's, Bob's own meditations that are there for our example. What do you think what is the enriching element of those for us, since the manifestations are in such a different station than we are?
I think they're revealing to us that they had the human element present at the same time, and they suffered because of that more than any of us will ever suffer. And somehow he talks about that they submit to the sufferings of the world. Think of the challenge. They bring this knowledge that the knowledge they have can change the whole future of humanity and lead it to joy and redemption and so on. And yet, as soon as they open their mouths, they're attacked. They're imprisoned. They're exiled. Baha'u'llah's prime example, till he ends up in the Holy Land, shut in a prison, deprived of interaction with others. Yet he transcends that and sends out messages to the rulers of the world that now are terrific messages of insight into what this world is about, what it's for. When he commands the kings, it's amazing things. Summons of the Lord of Hosts is another book that Shoghi Effendi didn't publish, but the house has published, full of Baha'u'llah's tablets to the kings and rulers and the ecclesiastical leaders, arraigning them for the state of mankind and for not responding to the message. I think that's very important. But one thing is, it shows there, whatever we suffer, we realize is nothing like what they've suffered for the cause. I think of in our pioneering, sometimes we faced hunger, but had no funds at times. We were so sick as dogs all the time. Nicaragua, I didn't have a healthy month there in 5 years. Every kind of parasite was inside me in a war with the other parasites. Would have made a good animated film.
Too visual.
You know, I mean, it's something, you know, you go to talk to some people in a river or in a village somewhere, and really you have such bad stomach cramps that you can hardly, you know, stand on your feet, and yet this is the only opportunity to talk to them. And I mean, I had to talk to myself. I says, okay, if I'm not here, the next person that comes after me is going to have to do the same thing, because it's just people from outside that area get sick and stay sick. What was the remedy back in the 50s for these parasites? Arsenic. Well, finally they told me, you've taken enough arsenic now, this is not going to be good for you anymore. And you kill the bugs, but then you go back and you get them again. So you have to take more arsenic to kill them. Crazy.
Glad you're here.
Well, it's part of it, but it's a certain decision to, you know, who the pioneers were a few years after we were there was Rain Wilson and his father. Exact same place. Exact same illnesses. Rain was a kid. He was 4 years old, I think, at the time. And he was there in Nicaragua for a couple of years, too. Well, and the pioneers, every place they faced this, but then you see, look at what Baha'u'llah did. He was poisoned, his hand was shaking, all these things happened, you know. I think it's a wonderful insight into the fact that they suffer what human beings suffer, but they suffer it in a worse manner because they have full knowledge of the potential of everybody, and they realize what a mess we make of everything. How disappointing it is that we won't embrace them right away. It takes hundreds of years. Then we do it, and then, yeah.
To me, those pieces of insight about the manifestation dwarf my adversities, and it makes me grateful that I'm not going through worse.
Yeah.
So everybody's got their own little take on it. One way to process your own life and process the writings into your life. So because it's independent, it's all good.
It's wonderful. Yes, take advantage of the riches that have been shared with us. So nice of you to come out, and I'm glad we had this opportunity to see you.